Last year, Press Club of India and India International.
Good afternoon, friends. And, we welcome you to season 2 of this conversation series, which IIC and PCI hold in collaboration. And this series, we have had 12 talks, 12 lectures or discussions in this series since we launched it in a year ago. And with a break, we are relaunching it, the season 2, and will begin shortly with a formal welcome. We have a video message from Director of IIC, Mr. Shrivastava. After that, opening remarks will be given by Mr. Gautam Lahiri, and then I'll introduce the speaker, and Mr. Borker will moderate the discussion. This is the format, and we have nearly an hour to complete all this. So we'll begin with the video message of Mr. Shrivastava.
Last year, Press Club of India and India International Center joined hands to start a very interesting series called Conversation with Media. Under this series, important policy makers, thinkers, writers, media persons are invited for delivering a talk on some important subjects, and that subject is also discussed with the audience. For the past 1 year, the series has done very well. Now we are renewing that series this year. In this regard, I would like to specifically mention say Suhas Borker, because he is the one who suggested this idea, which ultimately was accepted by both the sides, and the series has been started. This year, the first talk under the series is going to be delivered by Sri Ashok Lavasa, former election commissioner. In his talk, he is going to discuss about the general election 2024. As we all know, free and fair election is the hallmark of democracy, and a lot of progress has been made over the years by Election Commission of India to ensure that the elections are indeed fair and free. I'm sure Mr. Lavasa, with experience in the civil service and also with the Election Commission, he is going to deliver a very good talk, and he will bring out all the important issues which are relevant to hold the election in 2024 free and fair. This occasion, I would like to particularly welcome Sri Gautam Lahiri, President of Press Club of India, Sri Suhas Borker, who is going to moderate the discussions today, and of course the speaker, Sri Ashok Lavasa, my dear friend and colleague. And I welcome all of you, ladies and gentlemen, on this occasion, and I'm sure you are going to have a very fantastic deliberation today. Thank you.
And we now have Mr. Gautam Lahiri for his opening remarks, President of Press Club of India.
Well, thank you very much. I must thank Mr. Shrivastava for renewing this conversation with the Press Club of India, which we had in the last year. And also I must thank the trustee, Mr. Suhas Borker, who took the initiative to relaunch this conversation program. And particularly the first conversation of this year is we are having just on the eve of election. In less than 24 hours, people of India will start about in 120 constituencies tomorrow. They will be voting, expressing their choice for the candidates. But in the meantime, I think what we feel that during this, over the last few years, there is a perception among the people and also in the minds of the many, obviously in the political parties also, that not only the government will be under test or the role of opposition, at the same time, perhaps first time, the role of Election Commission will be also under scrutiny in the minds of the people. That's the most important thing. Because when just before the election announcement, The Supreme Court has given a verdict that how the election commissioners should be appointed, but we saw that Government of India has nullified that Supreme Court judgment. Apparently, they claim that Apex Court judgment should be taken as a law of the land, but they have overruled that judgment and passed an ordinance. Ordinance is supposed to be passed during an emergency. It's an emergency power, but they are using frequently. So that's the thing, and the most best person to talk about this is Mr. Lavasa. I must thank him for taking time. Media is also very busy, and also many people, I'm told, they called me, they want to listen to even in the social media, because that's why the Suhas has arranged the YouTube live telecast. It's a very good thing. So I will not take much time. So better I would hand it over to Mr. Vinay Kumar, former Secretary General of the Press Club, who was actually a key person for initiating this conversation. I hope we will continue. Next conversation will be in the Press Club of India, and hopefully with similar kind of dignitaries or personalities will be inviting. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dada. And we have today's speaker, as you know, Mr. Ashok Lavasa. He is a retired 1980 batch Indian Administrative Service Officer of Haryana cadre and was one of the 2 election commissioners of India. He has also served as the Finance Secretary of India, Environment, Forests and Climate Change Secretary and Civil Aviation Secretary. He served as the Vice President of Asian Development Bank from August 2020 to August 2023. He has done his schooling from Belgaum Military School and is a graduate from Deshbandhu College of Delhi University and a postgraduate in English from University of Delhi. He also has an MBA degree from Southern Cross University in New South Wales, Australia. In addition, he has an MPhil in Defence and Strategic Studies, and he has served in key positions in both the Government of India and the Government of Haryana. And without going into many more details, you all know he's a very well-known person. And then we have Mr. Suhas Borker, the moderator of this series. Mr. Suhas Borker is a filmmaker, journalist, documentary maker, and a media person. He's a trustee of IIC, and he has launched 3 initiatives, civil service initiatives. These are working group on alternative strategies, Jan Prasar and Green Circle, which is related to environment and climate change. Recently, we had a very fruitful discussion organized by Green Circle. So over to Mr. Borker for moderating today's discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Shrivastava, obviously in absentia. Thank you, Gautam, and thank you, Vinay. And thank you, Lavasa Sahab, for joining us today. Now, to begin with, I just want to read just 2 lines from the Constitution. That's Article 324, Elections. Superintendence, direction, and control of elections to be vested in an election commission. So, I mean, the Constitution is it's both ways. I mean, you have to the election commission has to be the guardian of the Constitution as far as elections are run, and also the Constitution's elements have to be respected by the election commission. Now, it's a gigantic kind of a task, of course, as we discussed earlier. I mean, nearly 97 crore voters, 10.5 lakh polling stations, 1.5 crore election officials. I mean, a huge thing. Now, what is your overview? Then we'll begin the dialogue. You just give an overview first.
Okay, thank you very much, IIC Director Mr. Shrivastava, Mr. Borker, Dr. Gautam Lahiri, Mr. Vinay Kumar. Let me begin by reading out a quotation. It says, and it's by Bismarck, it says, "People never lie so much as after a hunt, during a war or before an election. I am not included in that category, I hope. And there is one more which I thought I'll read out and leave all of you to guess who the person is who would have said this. I'm quoting, "My tour was especially concerned with the general elections all over India that were approaching, but I did not take kindly to the usual methods and devices that accompany electioneering. Elections were an essential and inseparable part of the democratic process. And there was no way of doing away with them. Yet, often enough, elections brought out the evil side of man. And it was obvious that they did not always lead to the success of the better man. Sensitive persons and those who were not prepared to adopt rough and ready methods to push themselves forward were at a disadvantage and prefer to avoid these contests. Was democracy then to be a close preserve of those possessing thick skins and loud voices and accommodating consciences?" I close the quotation. I don't know if anyone has come across this, but it would be interesting if we try and guess who this person was who wrote this. Okay, so no, I think Jawaharlal Nehru in the discovery of India. This is what he wrote. So I am going to speak for about 15 minutes on the topic, and the topic is General Elections 2024 Challenges and the world's largest electoral movement. So let's talk about the world's largest electoral movement before we come to the challenges. The reason why it is referred to as the world's largest electoral movement is clearly because of the size and scale of the elections that are conducted in India. Mr. Borker just mentioned 97, 98 crore voters, 1.2 million polling booths. By the way, it was just close to 1 lakh, a little over 1 lakh when the first elections were held, and about 1.4 crore officials were involved in the conduct of elections, more than 5 million EVMs, so on and so forth. So this is a very gigantic exercise which is conducted, which has been conducted over the last 7 decades in India. And it has earned a lot of respect, applause from the world. In fact, the standard quote is that it is the gold standard. This is what is mentioned by people who have observed the Indian elections. And I just would like to take you back in time to underscore the importance of building this institution. As all of you, most of you might know, that the first Chief Election Commissioner, Mr. Kumar Sen, who was the Chief Secretary of West Bengal before he was appointed as the Chief Election Commissioner. And when he was appointed the Chief Election Commissioner, already an announcement was made by the Prime Minister that the elections would be held in 1950 in the month of March. But when Mr. Sukumar Sen took over, he said that the most important part of holding the elections is the electoral roll. And therefore, he devoted himself to ensuring the integrity of the electoral roll. And because he was not satisfied, he did not conduct the elections not only in March 1950, but throughout the year. And he spent this time verifying the work which had been done by the secretariat which was constituted by the Constituent Assembly, and to see for himself whether the rules which have been prepared meet his satisfaction. So he toured from state to state, etc. It's a long story, but the long and short of it is that the elections were not held in 1950. They were not held even in the beginning of 1951, despite another announcement by the Prime Minister. Eventually, and one of the things which is well known about what he found was that he saw that in many electoral rolls, there were entries made like wife of so-and-so, mother of so-and-so, daughter of so-and-so. So he said a person who does not have the freedom to disclose her identity, how will she exercise her right freely and fairly? So at the cost of annoying a lot of people, he deleted 2.8 million names. And finally, of course, the elections were held in September, October of 1951. They went on for 4 months, and eventually we had the results in April of 52. That was the first elections. And some of you might have read the Indian Express carrying a story, very interesting story about the second elections when the delimitation had taken place. But the point that I caught from that story is that those elections, because of several compulsions of conducting the presidential poll after the elections, the Chief Election Commissioner and the Election Commission were able to conduct those elections in about 18 or 19 days. So the strength that this process has derived is from people who were institution builders. And if you study the evolution of the Election Commission and the history, you will find that over the period, many people have contributed, and essentially what they have left behind is a system which is driven by standard operating procedures. And these procedures are codified to the last detail. In fact, sometimes those of you who have worked in the elections, I see Mr. Tripathi would have worked in the elections. When we were officials in the district working in the elections, we used to feel that, does the Election Commission think that we are idiots? We can't understand this simple thing. But then the Election Commission takes care to codify every last detail which needs to be followed. And I think the reason why this system becomes so robust is that this is not only codified, it is drilled into the officials through repeated training. And I often compare the electoral machinery and the procedures that have been codified to some of the most rigid sectors which are driven completely by procedures. I mean, take the aviation sector, for example. There is nothing that is left to your discretion. You need to follow the letter. If you don't follow the letter, then there is a compromise. So similarly, in the elections, during the conduct of elections, that is precisely how this electoral machinery is able to deliver this huge elections. And I would say that it is able to deliver it quite satisfactorily. There would be aberrations, there would be complaints, there would be grievances. That's fine. But as far as the substantive part of managing the election process is concerned, I think the electoral machinery does a very good job of it. And I can tell you that all those who are involved in elections, they think that this is their test and this is the touchstone of their integrity, that they must perform this to the best of their abilities and to the satisfaction of the Election Commission of India. So that is the history of this entire process. But there are two elements to the whole process. And one is the management part of elections, and the other is the discretionary part of elections, conducting elections. And when I say discretionary part, it pertains to all the decisions which people expect the election commission to take in election after election, during the election, dealing with complaints, dealing with the whole mechanism. And that is where I think there is so much expectation from the election commission that sometimes people feel dissatisfied with the performance of the election commission. And one of the cardinal things that we need to understand and remember is that election commission generally operates within the boundaries of rules, regulations, laws which are laid down. So in a sense, it is like a referee which is discharging the responsibility of conducting a process as per the laid down procedure. But the difficulty arises because the Constitution and Article 324, which was read out, that invests the Election Commission huge authority to take decisions which are in the interest of conduct of elections. By the way, the word free and fair is not used in the Constitution. It is presumed that elections will be free and fair. And therefore, the superintendents control conduct of elections, of which the sole authority lies with the Election Commission. The interpretation of the Supreme Court also is that Article 324 is a reservoir of authority. And the Election Commission can dip into that reservoir whenever it feels that it needs to do that. It needs to assert its authority. It needs to take a decision which they think is important for the free and fair conduct of election. And I think it is this dilemma which causes one of the biggest challenges. So we are talking about challenges of general elections 2024. So not only 2024, but generally because of this duality in its character, there are heightened expectations, and everybody thinks that here is a Superman during this period who will deal with all difficulties and who will rise to the expectations of the people. I am not saying that it is not possible to do that, but unfortunately, the way people judge the performance of the Election Commission is in its ability to call out those in power. So it is, nobody is generally looking at the movement of so many men and machines and material and so many other things which are done. That is a given. People think that that is, of course, that is what you're expected to do, so you will do it. Nobody comments on that, and it's fine. I don't think that we need to praise the Election Commission for doing something which is a routine responsibility of the Election Commission. But it is this expectation and the plenipotentiary powers that Election Commission has, which people expect it to exercise during the elections. Now, I think there are three major challenges. One clearly is the enforcement of the Model Code of Conduct. And as we know that everywhere during the process of elections, the newspapers and everybody is commenting on the violation, perceived or real, of the Model Code of Conduct, and what is the response of the Election Commission. And the Model Code of Conduct, as is well known, is a document which has been derived after a process of consultation. And it has, principally, it controls, I think, 4 stakeholders. One, of course, the political parties. The others are the candidates who contest the elections. The third is the government. And in the government, there are 2 players. One is the ruling party and the other is the bureaucracy. So these are the four principal characters who are supposed to be regulated. Their conduct is supposed to be regulated by this model code of conduct. If you analyze the model code of conduct, you will find that by and large, it contains provisions which are already existing in law. So it's not as if that there is something new which is invented. Of course, there are a few things which are also there which are not part of law. But most of the, or many of the provisions in the Model Code of Conduct are those which are offences under different laws. So one is that you will not commit these offences, especially because of their ability or potential to disturb the level playing field and create or vitiate the atmosphere. The second set are restrictions on the government, that government shall not do the following things during the election. And that, again, the spirit behind that is because the government, and when I say government, it includes the ruling party and the permanent civil services, because of their inherent authority to influence people. And that is a restriction which Election Commission expects the parties will observe, the government will observe that restraint, and the Election Commission, of course, is meant to enforce all that. So I think the Model Code of Conduct is the one which creates the biggest challenge. And in the current context, everybody is discussing that, what about law enforcement agencies? Are they supposed to carry out their activities under the due process of law? Or are they also meant to be restrained because of the elections being in progress? And so far, as I said, because the Model Code of Conduct does not cover the law enforcement agencies or the courts for that matter, Election Commission maintains a very studious approach, very careful approach on how to deal with the action of the law enforcement agencies and the courts for that matter. But the fact is that they do have the power to call out or to scrutinize complaints that they would receive, even pertaining to law enforcement agencies, if the complaint is that it means disturbance of the level playing field. So they do have the authority, but they do have a tradition, they do have a framework within which they operate, and that is what I think is one of the biggest challenges. How do they balance this? The second issue before the Election Commission would be that how do you handle the performance of the media? Because on what is publicity and what is paid news, the distinction is quite blurred nowadays. And whereas there are regulations to control publicity, paid publicity, in the sense that it will go into the account of the candidate who's giving the publicity material, all that is accounted for. But if the media itself decides to publicize somebody or some candidate or some party in a disproportionate manner, what authority can the Election Commission exercise on that media? This is a challenge. Because you do find that during the period of elections, news gets tilted. It is news, but it gets tilted. You do find that even while covering the polling, some of the reporters will report it in a fashion as if it is to influence the voter's mind. So, but how do you draw the distinction between these two? I think that is a challenge. It will become a bigger challenge in times to come because of the nature of publicity. And we all know that production of feature films, which get certification from the censor board, and they get released. There was an instance in 2019 when a biopic was to be released, which was stopped by the Election Commission. But the point is that These are very complex matters, and to expect that Election Commission will find a solution to this, I think is expecting a little too much. Because either you put a blanket ban that during this period, nothing doing, nobody will release anything of this kind. But then does it compromise or does it suppress the right to expression, the freedom of expression? So those are questions which I think are important for us to understand. And social media is a different kettle of fish altogether. So the extent to which I think Election Commission has succeeded is they entered into a dialogue with the platforms, and these platforms were able to commit themselves to a voluntary code of ethics. And what purpose that achieved was that you could account for the expenditure incurred by various political parties or candidates in using the social media. So that is a limited extent to which that voluntary code of ethics was able to achieve. Of course, it also gives the Election Commission authority to direct some of the platforms to take off offensive matter. You've just seen some matter being taken off under protest by X. So that is as far as social media is concerned. And the third thing that I want to touch upon is, I've taken more time than was allotted, but the final thing that I want to say is about the expenditure aspect. Now, whereas there are limits to spending by political candidates, the candidates who are contesting, there are limits. These limits are monitored, they're accounted for, and there are expenditure observers in the field. There are committees in the field which are constantly monitoring, reviewing this. And there is also a submission at the end of the election by all the candidates. The parties also submit their annual accounts once in a year, but two issues. One, there is no limit on spending by political parties. So this is an area which Election Commission itself has been recommending to the government that we must put a ceiling. They have even proposed what ceiling there should be on spending by political parties during elections. And the other aspect, of course, is the expenditure incurred, which is off the record, which is a matter of conjecture. So nobody knows how much that amount is. It's all speculation. I think ADR tried to put some number to that during the 2019 elections, but then these are numbers which nobody can verify. So I think that during these elections, these three things are the major challenge: the enforcement of the Model Code of Conduct, the regulation of publicity, and the third is how do you regulate expenditure. These are the three things, and all the three of them have a bearing on level playing field. Thank
you. Thank you, Lavasa Sahab, for that overview. Now, just a few questions, and then we'll open it to the floor. You mentioned about the challenges, and you mentioned the MCC, and then handling of the media and expenditure. Now, there is an issue that correct me if I'm wrong, that the Election Commission does not pick up so moto, anything. There has to be a complaint. Now, and then there is also a cherry picking of the complaints. If I am not wrong, some time back you had suggested that there should be a listing of all the complaints on the website, and an ATR should be issued on each complaint. Now that has not been done, obviously for reasons known and unknown. So how would you react to that question?
So two issues that you have raised is suo moto and cherry picking. On the question of suo motu, taking cognizance by itself, Election Commission has avoided taking suo motu action, and I think it is for good reason, because they feel that they will, if they pick up complaints suo motu, or if they pick up issues suo motu, then they would be exposing themselves to accusation of discrimination. They cannot be expected to know everything that is happening. So that is one, and that's why I think for good reason they have taken a principled position, although nothing prevents them from taking suo motu cognizance. But they hold themselves back for this reason, and they respond to complaints. The second thing is about cherry picking, and that I think is an issue which can be handled if there is a transparent system by which all the complaints which are received for violation of Model Code of Conduct are put on the website of the Election Commission, and the action taken by the Commission is similarly uploaded on the website. It is there for people to see what decision the Election Commission eventually takes on the complaint. That could be a matter of debate and discussion, because in any case, it is not possible to satisfy everyone all the time. But at least nobody will accuse you of not acting or not disclosing the information that people ought to know before they make up their mind on whether the Election Commission is fair or not fair.
Coming to the nitty-gritty of it, what is stopping the VVPAT from being put in place?
No, the VVPAT is in place, and I think as we discuss, as we have this conversation, there is another conversation going on in the Supreme Court. So, see, my view in the matter, and I suppose when you say VVPAT, you're talking about the demand for counting the slips. Is that the question? See, this is the whole process of using EVM and using VVPAT and counting. It's an evolving process. It is not as if that the system which is followed today was the system which was followed when the first EVM was used. In 2004, when EVMs were used universally in all the elections, and thereafter thousands of elections have been conducted using the EVM. But the VVPAT did not exist when the EVMs were introduced. And EVM has been the subject of criticism, attack by, I think, probably all the parties at different points in time. But the VVPAT was a later introduction, and it was introduced because of the orders of the Supreme Court and in consultation with the Election Commission. When the VVPATs were introduced, the cross-checking of the slips was again a decision. One EVM will be picked up for cross-checking in every assembly constituency. There was no statistical logic to picking up one. Then in 2019, the Supreme Court said you do 5. So they've done 5. And I think the cross-checking of 5 EVMs per assembly constituency would mean more than 20,000 machines were tallied. There has been no discrepancy so far that has been found in this tallying. So that is the reason why the Election Commission has stood by its ground of 5 as ordered by the Supreme Court. But as I said, that this is an evolving process. And if there is doubt in the minds of people, and if there are demands that you should do more than 5, I don't know whether 100% is the answer, but the point is whether you can evolve a process or a number which can satisfy people more and which can re-establish the credentials of the system better. So, if in the judgment of the Election Commission and everyone else who's involved, they need to do 100%, they should go ahead and do 100%. At least once and for all, this doubt and debate is settled. But there could be many ways in which you can convince the people about the credibility of this system and establish through a process of cross-checking that the system is sound.
Okay. The last, I mean, we've spoken about the credibility of the institution. I go back to a statement made by Ambedkar on May 16, 1949, in the Constituent Assembly. And he said he feared that regardless of the constitutional provision mandating independence of the Election Commission, its commissioners might come under the thumb of the executive. Now, somehow this, you know, to some of us, this is exactly what is happening. And I mean, we spoke about cherry picking. So motto, you said there's ingrained inhibition from doing that. But things, you know, seem not to be working towards a credible solution, which in the minds of the people hits out. Yeah.
So I think I can respond to what you have quoted by using another quotation, again from the Constituent Assembly debates. And this is, whatever the Constitution may or may not provide, the welfare of the country will depend upon the way in which the country is administered. That will depend upon the men who administer it. If the people who are elected are capable and men of character and integrity, they would be able to make the best of even a defective constitution. If they are lacking in these, the constitution cannot help the country.
I think we'll go ahead and open the floor now. Yeah. We'll pick up 5 questions to begin with. Yeah, go ahead. Just identify yourself. We know who you are, but just for the sake of our live broadcast.
Thank you, Kumar. Just 2-3 points I want to make, maybe questions actually. One is that, you know, when we have actually, you know, the talk about the financing of the campaigns, you mentioned about the candidates' account being audited by the competent, different authorities. Why is it at the same time, in connection with the election campaign, the party accounts are also not audited at the same time? Which actually would mean that the parties will be accountable. I mean, sending them later on and annually actually is practically a meaningless exercise, because everybody knows that the accounting basically is highly questionable. So that's the first point. The second point is that, you know, you talked about that it's based on the, you know, not suo moto. But for example, where there's a blatant violation of law, I mean, the law prohibits invoking caste or religion or those kind of things. Why doesn't the Election Commission directly then take notice of that and initiate, whatever process required under the law? And just one last point. You know, all these things go back to the way the Election Commission handles the question of parties, political parties. Registration of political parties contingent upon these parties submitting copy of the Constitution. Now, when the parties break, at that time the questions do come into examination. Why is it at that time, number one, the Election Commission does not see whether a particular party or a splitting faction is not actually following the Constitution with the submit to the Election Commission to decide on the justiciability of that whole process. And also second point here, you know, when a party splits, so the splitting party has to get its different symbol, because that is a kind of a brand image of the party. Why is it that the Election Commission gives them, let's say, one example, Uddhav Thackeray or Shiv Sena Uddhav Thackeray faction, Shiv Sena such faction, when if the symbol is kind of a brand name, then the splitting party has to find a different name which cannot be questioned. It's like a patent law, that anything which bears the slightest resemblance, that actually is not allowed. Now, if some of these things are followed, I think this kind of splitting of parties and, the kind of thing that is the mess that takes place on the eve of elections, I think that can be cleaned out quite considerably. Thank you.
Why don't you come up with a mic, please? Yeah. Take the mic.
My name is Anthony Thomas. Hi. My question is slightly more fundamental. There is the independence of the Election Commission has been weakened. There have been many suggestions earlier about the appointment and removal, if in case me, of election commissioners. Wanted parity between the Chief Election Commissioner and the other election commissioners. Now, also the Chief Election Commissioner had this parity with the Supreme Court judge. Now, the new law has brought it down to the Chief Cabinet Secretary, I think. The proposal was there. Now, this is the main issue. If the Election Commission is appointed, well, the Supreme Court suggested some procedure that has been ruled out. But even the removal of the election commissioners, they can be removed anytime, or the recommendation of the Chief Election Commissioner. This happened in the case of Mr. Chola. The then Chief Election Commissioner asked him to be dismissed, but of course the government did not follow it. Now, you give security of tenure to the election commissioner, then they will be able to act more independently.
Fine. Pick up, yeah, go ahead. Just one sec here. Yeah, just one sec.
Shall
Yeah, go ahead.
Good evening, sir. My name is Pavan. Sir, you just mentioned that the critical role which government and the permanent bureaucracy plays in the conduct of the elections, free elections. What are your thoughts on, in fact, going for caretaker government during these 3-4 months, as it is done in many other countries, even our neighbors also do it. The second thing is that now, in fact, elections are conducted in 7 phases, with increase in means of communication, IT facilities, and other things. Why this period cannot be reduced to a shorter period? Thank you.
Yeah, can you grab a mic there? So can you just help him out with the mic?
I'm speaking. No, you can hear me without.
No, that's we are
recording.
recording.
Thank you. So I had to
Press the key, sir. Press the key.
I had 2 questions.
So just
We all know, K. Vijay Rao is my name. I had 2 questions. One is that as technology emerges, obviously the EVPAT, etc., needs to change. And even if the Election Commission is not willing to accept the technology part of interference, at least it could have satisfied the opposition members' claims that the printout, instead of going into the box, can be given to the voter and he can put it into the box, into another box. That is the simplest thing that could have been done, but the Election Commission refused to even meet the opposition. So why is that so, and where is the fairness in this? The second question I had was about why this elections is taking such long phases, especially since 2009. 2009, we have seen where ballot boxes have been taken away and things like this. So why have they done this? Thank you.
We'll take the last one. Yeah, go please.
Can I ask a question, looking beyond the Election Commission, looking beyond it, in the general conduct of a free and fair election, do you think there has been a gradual slide back over the last few elections in the conduct of the context of free and fair elections? I'm asking this general question, not the election commission. Has there been a general slide back in the conduct of free and fair elections?
So, the first question was on why not do a concurrent audit of the political parties during the campaign. You see, even the political parties, when they submit their accounts to the Election Commission, it is audited account. So I don't know what additional purpose would be served if you say that their account should be audited at the time of elections. In any case, as I was saying, that there is no limit on the amount of money that they can spend. So what is the additional advantage that we are getting by subjecting their accounts to an audit immediately after the election? But they do submit their accounts annually. Those accounts are scrutinized, and if there are observations, then the Election Commission makes those observations. Sometimes those accounts can be sent to another government organization for scrutiny, etc. All that is a procedure which takes place. But in the absence of any limit, I think the more meaningful reform would be A, that there is a limit on spending by political parties for campaign, and B, that political parties' accounts should be subject to audit by the CAG or its nominated auditor. And 3, which is a struggle which has been going on from the Central Information Commission, that should political parties be public entities which fall in the purview of the Right to Information Act. So, no, currently CIC has a ruling that they are, but it is not being enforced, and nobody knows how to enforce it. So I think that is as far as who will go to the court? Oh, yes. So why is nobody going to the court?
I think you go ahead.
Okay. The other thing is about, you raised issues about registration of parties and bifurcation and allocation of symbols, etc. I have no comments to make on specific cases, but there is a procedure by which the control, which faction has the control over the party is determined by following a system of observing objective parameters. Those parameters are laid down, they are known to all the parties. It is not invented in every case. So Election Commission does follow some objective criteria. What has happened in a specific case, I don't know about that, and I don't want to comment on that. Yeah. As far as the independence of the commission, no, the general principle that they follow is that you should not use a name or a symbol which has a tendency to confuse the voters. So that is the principle which they do follow. On the independence of the commission, you see, everybody says that, let's say Mr. T.N. Session was the most powerful commissioner. He was appointed under the same system. But, so I don't know whether a process and an outcome have necessarily a favorable correlationship. Through the same process, you can have an outcome which is extraordinary, which is impactful, and through a so-called reform process, you may have an outcome which is suboptimal. But the fact that people have performed well under the old system, that does not discredit the system. But I'll come to the 2 or 3 points which you made. One was about the parity which ECs should have with the CEC on removal process. When the bill was introduced in August 2023, it did provide for parity. When this bill was introduced first time. And equally, it lowered the status from Supreme Court judges to Cabinet Secretary. Finally, when the bill was accepted, adopted with amendments, this was changed. The status was restored to Supreme Court judges, but this parity was again brought back to status quo. I don't know what was the reason for doing that, because it made no sense because the one is not related with the other. But that is what eventually happened. And as far as the selection process is concerned, I think you use the word ordinance. There is no ordinance. It's a law.
Ultimately, it was passed in the parliament.
Slide back.
No, I'm talking about it's a bill which was adopted and passed by the parliament. So that's the law of the land, and Supreme Court did not direct that the committee should be composed in this manner. They made an interim arrangement which that was the composition of the committee. But I do believe that if the committee that finally has been constituted was broad-based, it had members which are not directly related to the government, it could have created greater confidence. So that, I think, goes without saying, because there are committees in which Chief Justice of India is a member, although there is a view that Chief Justice should not be included as a member for good reason, because he should distance himself in case there is a challenge to the appointment process itself. So, but as I said, that I think you have to judge all the people who have been appointed by their performance, and I don't think we should be prejudiced against any individual. Because he has been appointed by a certain process which people don't like, that doesn't mean that the person himself will not perform well. On the phasing of elections and the caretaker. Caretaker, of course, is beyond my remit to comment. It's a very far-reaching change, which Parliament has to sort of figure out whether they are in favor of doing this, imitating neighbors. But on a more serious side, the phasing of elections, why it is, by the way, the first election was in 68 phases in 1951. But for the last several elections, it is 7 phases. That it can be reduced, I think there is a good case for a review, that even if you have 7 phases, can the total duration of elections period, can that be curtailed? And I think there should be a serious review conducted by the Election Commission in consultation with everyone to see that with the introduction of modern systems of mobility and management, can they bring down the whole period? Dr. Qureshi, of course, has been on record to say that he can conduct the elections in 33 days. So whether 33 or the 3-month period now, but I think there is a case for reducing this total duration which is spent on conducting elections. And I think it is possible to do that. Finally, this issue of the voter slip, the print being given to the voter and he can put it in the ballot box. I think this is also part of the submission which has been made before the Supreme Court. And let's await the verdict. But as I said, that there are several alternatives which are possible, which are workable, and which can lead to greater confidence. And whether there is a slide back, I don't think it is for any individual to say whether there is a slide back. Everyone will have his own opinion on whether there has been a slide back. But certainly what I can say is that there is a heightening of expectations. And if that heightened expectations leads you to greater disappointment, then I don't know whether you should blame the person who has the expectation or the person who does not fulfill that expectation.
No, just that slide back, if we regard the vote as a social contract, now where do we stand today on that social contract? I mean, and you began with that Bismarck's thing about, the lies before the election. So overall, how do you, I mean, this is off the cuff remark.
No, I think one way to look at or evaluate the performance could be, let's say, what is the media commenting? What are the editorials saying about the entire process? That could be one yardstick on seeing whether the performance of a particular body is in line with what people expect. Because there is a period where there was a lot of praise heaped on the Election Commission. There is a period where there is a lot of critical observation on the performance of the Election Commission. So, if that is the yardstick, then it can lead you to a certain conclusion, whether there is a slide back or not. But I think in terms of the volatility of the atmosphere, and in terms of excitement which elections are generating, and in terms of the power that the media wields on the whole system, those have exponentially grown.
Okay, there's one there. Yeah. Two.
Okay. Sir, my name is Ashok Rao. I have two brief questions. One is, if a star campaigner says that, say, Bajrang Bali when you press the button, and that is not taken as use of religion, then what constitutes use of religion? How do you define the use of religion? If I can make such a submission as saying, take the name of a particular god when you press a button, and that is not taken seriously, I don't know what can be taken seriously. My second question is that as per the law, if I'm right, the ballot boxes have to be mixed, but the EVMs don't allow you to mix. So you may not know where I have voted, but you certainly will know where these 100 people who are commanded by that particular EVM have voted. Isn't that a breach of secrecy?
Sir, my name is Aditi Agrawal. I'm from Hindustan Times. I have multiple questions, but I'll ask only two. One is about publicity by party in power and almost the coordination with media, so to say. So when the party in power uses government resources to campaign and doesn't disclose that, for example, a certain interview that Mr. Modi from BJP did with Bill Gates wasn't disclosed to be an interview that was conducted before the declaration of elections. And it was released 2 weeks after the declaration of elections, a month after the interview was conducted, on the BJP channel, not on any government channel. So it was on the Narendra Modi YouTube channel. Now, is that something that would be considered a breach of use of government resources for the purpose of campaigning, especially when there are no disclosures made? And related to that is the point that a lot of media ran it as a live interview and therefore misinformed the readers or viewers. So is that something that the EC can hold the media to account for violation of, perhaps not MCC, but ethical conduct under PCI rules, etc.? The second question is, to what extent are EC orders binding during MCC? For instance, if EC were to instruct my employer, Hindustan Times, or the party in power, BJP, what if they don't listen? What are the powers EC has to hold them to account?
I'm Narayanan from KS Narayanan from Dinamala, Tamil Daily. I have a small question, sir. At present, VVPAT verification is done from 5 assembly segments. I would like to know what's the time consumed during this process. If Apex Court gives an order to count all the 100% VVPAT, what will be the time taken to count all these things? Thank you.
Probably the last one now.
Yeah, I'm Sabina Indrajit. I had the good fortune of covering the Election Commission of India during the time of Mr. T.N. Session. And I must say that at that point, I think the fear of God was instilled in the government and all. My question is not to Mr. Lavasa, my question is to the former election commissioner. Two election commissioners just before the general elections quit. When we talk about the credibility, it puts a big question mark why they're quitting just before the general election. And like you said, media reportage. Media reportage was talking about dissents, a dissent. Do you think it's important for the constitutional authority to instill that confidence in the voter and cite actually the reasons for calling it a day just before when this mega exercise is taking place? Because like you said, media reportage, you've talked about, I think the biggest challenges I see is the credibility of the Election Commission.
Vivek Bharati is my name. So is it possible to tamper with electoral rolls through omissions? Omissions.
Sir, I just want to ask how the Election Commission can support the voter, because a lot of people, when I go to vote, I see a large number of poor people are disenfranchised because the names are not on one of the 40 lists that we have to tick. Secondly, why are there so many lists? And thirdly, has there been an attempt to look at the statistics to see who actually is being disenfranchised? Because in my booth, it was mainly minority people who were disenfranchised in New Delhi. And you know Meenakshi Lekhi won.
Okay.
Yeah, this is the last, yeah, please go ahead.
So we have time until 5 o'clock?
No, no, you wanted till 4, you crossed 10 minutes already.
Yeah, because there are too many questions. So about the integrity of the electoral rolls and whether you can tamper them by omission. See, once again, you have to go back to what is this procedure. Even now, it is possible for people to get their names enrolled as voters in the elections which have not yet been notified, right? For example, Delhi has not been notified. But if there is somebody who thinks, unfortunately, what happens is that people don't pay enough attention to this aspect before the D-date. And suddenly, for example, in this room, I don't know how many people have verified whether their names exist in the electoral rolls. So, but most of us have not, because we presume that because we have a voter card, therefore our name will also be there in the roll, which actually it should be, right? But the way the system works is that, every year there is a revision of rules which takes place, and they are supposed to, the BLO is supposed to go and verify, etc., etc. And if there is a name which is to be omitted, there is a notice given, and all that happens. So if there are names which have been omitted, one suggestion which has come, for example, is that once a name is entered in an electoral roll, it should not be omitted. And you should freeze that electoral roll unless that person says, please remove my name from here. You can look at that, but hand on heart, how many people have bothered to get their names deleted from an older electoral roll after shifting their place of residence to another area? You just presume that it is the responsibility of the system. They should do it automatically. But unfortunately, the Representation of People's Act does not authorize automatic deletion of names. So even if you have been enrolled elsewhere, now of course, because of the availability of technology, if you give an application in a new place, you're also supposed to say that you were registered in another place, then they can verify and inform that particular ARO that this name should be deleted. So it's a pretty complicated process, but these complaints, the kind that you are mentioning, they could be there. I'm not denying that. But I think the imputation that you're making is that it is done deliberately. And I think that is where, having been part of the Election Commission, I would not say that there is any design whatsoever in these names which accidentally might get deleted. It is the responsibility of the voter, it is the responsibility of the parties, political parties, local area leaders to make sure that the names are included in the electoral roll. There is adequate time available for doing that. There is a helpline available of the Election Commission. There is an app on which you can go. Things are pretty straightforward. So that is a responsibility, I think, voter. By the way, under the Representation of People's Act, it's an offense to have your name in two places. But nobody has been taken to task for doing that because the Election Commission feels that doesn't matter. As long as the person has the right to vote, at least that right should be protected.
There's a corollary to this issue because then when we're talking about rigging, which we all know happens, then we don't know how many of these people who were either disenfranchised or didn't show up to vote, how many of those votes have actually been polled, because having studied some of the complaints made to the Election Commission, there were some 13 assembly constituencies, Lok Sabha constituencies, where the number of votes polled is more than the listed number of voters. So this is something which is not a lapse on the part of the voter. This is the manner in which the process of elections is carried out and the role that is given to the person who is at the booth.
Just a minor clarification.
Sir,
Sorry,
one thing.
Just a minor clarification. Sorry. You know, you mentioned about it's an offense, the name being in two electoral lists. I think the offense is if you vote in the same event in the two voting.
No, that's a separate offense.
I see. Okay.
I think we can't just go on.
Yeah.
There were two more things which you would. One was on that Ashok Rao's thing on the use of religion.
Yeah. So what is invoking religion? As I said, that you and I might feel that it is an invocation of religion, but it is for the Election Commission to determine whether it is or not. So I cannot pass judgment on why they are making up their mind in a certain way. Right. There I agree that the order should be speaking and they should give reasons why they feel. But by the way, the orders which are issued, they do have the reasoning why they are taking a decision of that kind.
About the no disclosure that Hindustan Times last.
Publicity by party in power. This is part of the problem which I mentioned about dealing with publicity, because you do find that just before the elections, before the model code of conduct, there is a spate of advertisements issued at the expense of the government. Now, there again, there have been suggestions in the past that should you have a period of freeze, maybe 180 days, 90 days before the D-Day, that government shall not issue any advertisements. But it is not for Election Commission to unilaterally take this decision, because you would be treading on some of the legitimate functions that government is performing by encroaching on that authority and curtailing the authority of the government to inform the people about government activity. So, as I said, that you have to negotiate these things very carefully and in consultation. If the government, you see the whole spirit of the model code, and that is where I think you asked whether model code is enforceable or not. According to the Supreme Court judgment, model code does carry the force of law, right? But as we know that in law, there is a letter and there is a spirit. So people who are smart, they will adhere to the letter but violate the spirit. And that will give enough reason for the enforcement authority to say that there is no violation of the letter. So what can I do? So that is where I think it is the model code is a collaborative compact. And all those who are party to that compact, they also have to observe restraint. You can't say that in a class of unruly students, it is only the class teacher who is responsible for maintaining discipline. So, I mean, these are real issues. And as I said, that when people play a game, for example, they don't play a game to violate rules. They play a game to they play the game to win, but not by violating rules. So, if people decide that no, I am going to commit foul and I am going to see whether the referee can catch me or not, then it becomes so difficult for anybody to regulate that kind of exercise. But as I said, that you see, ultimately the referee has the unenviable task of giving somebody out. You might be Virat Kohli, but if you are out, you are out. The referee is not there to please the spectators or the player. He is there to do a job. So, which reminds me of a story which I had heard. There was a very famous British cricket player, Sir Grace, I think Walter Grace or something. WG. So when he was about to retire, he was invited by his village to play a match. And he went, and there was a huge crowd of spectators. And unfortunately, on the first ball, Grace got out. So when the umpire gave him out, he walked up to the umpire and he said, "You think these guys have come to see your umpiring?"
I think on that note, now there's a little thing which has to be done from the press club. So Vinay, just do it.
Thank you everyone for attending today's very interesting session with Mr. Lavasa and for being such a responsive and attentive audience. And as a token of appreciation, I'll request our President of Press Club of India, Mr. Gautam Lahiri, to present a small memento to Mr. Lavasa.
And just mention what it is.
This is a coffee mug inscribed with Press Club of India's logo.
You are all invited to have tea at the
Please join us for
lounge
tea.
Veranda.
At the veranda lounge.
Yeah. And thank you very much. Thank you very much, everybody.